Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In today's video, we're going to revisit OpenStack, one of my favorite technologies. In fact, what I'm going to do in this video is show you the process of migrating from VMware to OpenStack, and this video is very timely considering the recent price hike that left a lot of people stunned. And what I'm referring to is the recent announcement from Broadcom that they're going to be increasing licensing costs for VMware ESXi by as much as 300%. And this announcement was a huge burden, to say the least. Organizations had to either pay up or train their staff to implement something new. And many are going with the latter. Alternatives to ESXi saw a huge spike in adoption around the time of the announcement, and one of the alternatives that people are considering right now is OpenStack. Like I mentioned, I've covered OpenStack on this channel in the past, where I partnered with OpenMetal, a leading provider of hosted private cloud powered by OpenStack, to produce a course where I went over all the finer points of OpenStack itself and how to get started with it. And OpenStack is one of my favorite technologies. I love the fact that it's open source, and I also like the fact that it scales very well. And this means that organizations can implement OpenStack and then later scale their infrastructure to keep up with demand. It's a really great alternative to VMware. In fact, it's a really great solution all around. Also, OpenStack is well supported within the industry, and demand for OpenStack engineers is seeing an increase as well, especially given the recent announcement by Broadcom regarding their extreme price hike. But how do you actually go about migrating from ESXi to OpenStack? An obvious question at this point is how involved it might be to move your servers from one solution to the other. After all, for some organizations, rebuilding each of their servers can be a monumental task, especially considering the amount of virtual machines being deployed in the average data center today. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you the process every step of the way. What I'll do is grab a virtual machine from VMware ESXi, I'm going to export it, then I'll show you the process of converting the VM, and finally we'll import it into OpenStack. And I'm going to break this down for you guys so that every step is very easy to understand, and by the end of this video you'll have a great idea what the process overall looks like when it comes to migrating from ESXi to OpenStack. And this video is for those of you that have already made the decision to switch to OpenStack, as well as those of you that are on the fence and want to see what the migration process might look like before making a decision. You can follow along with me as I go through the process of migrating a VM, or you can simply take notes and use what you've learned to help you with the decision-making process on whether or not OpenStack is the right direction for you. That said, the process is fairly straightforward, so while it might seem like a monumental task to migrate a virtual machine, it's actually a lot easier than you might think. However, if you already have an OpenStack implementation that you can use, I highly recommend that you follow along with me. After all, hands-on is the best way to learn, so if you're able to follow along, I highly recommend that you do so. Now, if you don't have an OpenStack environment already, something to know about it is that it can be a bit time-consuming to set up, and it is considered an advanced solution. The resource requirements to run OpenStack are higher than in other alternatives, but the trade-off is more than worth it, as OpenStack is a fantastic solution that offers a large feature set. I especially love the support for multi-tenancy, which means you can host multiple companies from a single OpenStack build. Now, if you don't already have an OpenStack implementation, a great way to get started is to partner with a company that specializes in OpenStack. OpenMetal is one such company. They live and breathe OpenStack, and you could utilize OpenStack within their data center rather than setting it up in your own data center, which makes the process a lot easier. With OpenMetal, you can get quick access to complete OpenStack environments hosted within their data center, and that alleviates the burden of having to set up an entire rack to run it yourself. And OpenMetal lives and breathes OpenStack. They're extremely enthusiastic about not only OpenStack itself, but also the greater community. In fact, OpenMetal is sponsoring today's video and even provided the OpenStack environment that I'll be using for this tutorial. I really appreciate their support of Learn Linux TV, and I highly recommend their service. Now, one last thing before we get started. Like I mentioned, I'm using OpenStack as provided by OpenMetal, but even if you're using OpenStack from some other source, even if you built it yourself, you could still follow along. There should be no difference when it comes to the process of migrating a virtual machine from ESXi to OpenStack, regardless of where your OpenStack came from. I'm going to be showing you everything within OpenStack. You'll see the entire process, and it's going to be a lot of fun. In fact, let's dive in right now. To get the ball rolling, there's some general advice and some best practices that I'd like to go over. Most of what I'm going to mention may seem obvious to some of you, but I want to make sure we're all starting from the same mindset. Anyway, the first thing you should do with a project like this is create a project plan. You don't need to necessarily write a long report or anything, but when you're working on a large migration project, it's important to come up with a basic plan which increases your chances for success. Of course, the first thing you should add to your project plan is a list of VMs that you'll want to migrate. While you complete this list, think of any virtual machines you have in use within VMware that you might no longer need. As you can imagine, it's a waste of time to migrate resources you're going to end up decommissioning anyway. And with a migration such as this, it's a great time to audit what you are and are not using. As system administrators, we're often so busy that it's hard to find time to audit resources, but a migration plan is probably the best time to do so. In addition to the list of VMs, you should also determine the order in which you'll move them. My suggestion is to start the project by migrating your least important servers first. For example, consider servers that you use for testing purposes. Since testing servers generally have software installed that's not mission critical to the company, no one will notice if you take them down to experiment. And while you move your testing environment, you'll get some hands-on practice with the entire process, which will make it that much easier when you start migrating the important stuff. Another consideration for the project plan is downtime. Now, the process I'm going to go over for migrating a virtual machine shouldn't really have much in the way of downtime, but sometimes certain processes could take longer than you'd expect, such as waiting for DNS to propagate. You'll need to have messaging in place and communicate to your users that intermittent consistencies might occur during the migration. When it comes to best practices, a very important one comes in during the very end of the process, and there's a reason why I'm mentioning this particular best practice first. After you successfully migrate a virtual machine, you should shut the old one down. In fact, you should not only shut it down, but also ensure that there's no configuration in place to automatically start the VM. The reason why this is important is because you might end up with a user or resource that for some reason doesn't get a DNS update. They might have a session open to the old server that might persist even after the migration is complete. This can result in a situation where you have more than one server that's serving a particular resource, and data ends up getting written to either of them somewhat randomly. And then you have what's called a split brain scenario. I know this sounds weird, but I've seen this chaos firsthand. So again, after you migrate your servers, ensure that the originals on your VMware server are powered off and can't be powered on. Another tip I have for you is to set the time to live value of the DNS entries for your server to a low number, such as 5 minutes. And be sure to do this at least a few days before the migration date. This will make it faster for all of your users and applications to point to the new IP address of your servers, and that minimizes downtime. When it all comes down to it, be sure you have a good migration plan and that you document things along the way. And with all that said, it's time to see the process of actually performing the migration. What we'll do is migrate a Debian VM that I set up on ESXi, and then we'll migrate it to OpenStack. In this section, we're going to see the process of migrating a virtual machine from ESXi to OpenStack, and we'll start the process on ESXi. And here I've set up an ESXi server to show as an example. So what I'll do is log in. And here we are. On my end, I'll click on Virtual Machines. And right here, I have a Debian server that I set up for this particular example. You can see it right here. And nothing major, it's just a basic installation. But it doesn't really matter what you have installed within your VM since we're doing a disk-level migration. All of your software, files, configuration, everything will carry over. However, to make it easier to prove that it's the same machine when I import it into OpenStack, what I'll do right now is just make a few changes. Anyway, here we have the virtual machine, so what I'll do is log in. And what I'll do is just set up a simple change just to make sure that we have persistence between the old and the new. So what I'll do is just type nano, I'll type message.txt, and I'm just going to type hello world just like that. Pretty simple, so let's just save the file and exit out. You don't have to follow along with me on my end. I'm just doing this just to show for an example. Anyway, I saved the file and I closed out of the editor. So what I'm going to do is just close the console here. And then what I'll do is shut down the virtual machine. So now the virtual machine is down, and this is important because we really shouldn't be capturing a disk image when the machine is still running, because the reason being something could change while it's running, so we want to make sure that we shut it down. Anyway, what I'll do is go back to virtual machines right here. To export the virtual machine, I'll check this box right here, and then what I'll do is click Actions, and then I'm going to click Export. I'm going to leave the default selections here. I don't need to capture RAM. It wasn't even running anyway. But what we really want at this point is the VMware image for the server, which is what this is going to give us. So what I'll do at this point is click Export. And we can see that the template is downloading. So I'm going to wait for this to finish, and then I'll be right back. And now that we've exported the virtual machine, we'll need to import it into OpenStack. But in order to do that, we're going to have to convert the disk into the qemu-img format. This format is natively supported by OpenStack, and we'll use the converted disk image to set up the server there. And the easiest way to convert the disk image is by using the qemu-img utility, which we can install on a Linux machine. So for this step, I recommend that you set up a spare Linux instance if you don't already have one, and we'll use that for the process of converting the image. On my end, my local laptop, the one that I'm recording this footage from, is already running Linux. It's running Fedora 42 currently. So to install the qemu-img utility, all I have to do is run sudo dnf and then install, and then the name of the package. If you're using Debian or some other distribution, you can replace the DNF package manager with whichever one your distro uses, but on my end, this command is correct. So what I'll do is press Enter to install the utility, and I'll answer Y for yes to confirm that I do want to install the utility, and I'll press Enter again. And it's complete. And as you can see, I have the utility available. So let's move on to the next step in the process and get it converted. On my end, I downloaded the VMware export file to my downloads directory. So I'll go inside there. And as you can see, I have the vmdk file right there. And that particular file is the disk image for the virtual machine that I exported. We'll need to convert that to the qemu-img format to be compatible with OpenStack. So here's what we'll do. We'll type qemu-img. We'll use the keyword convert because that's what we're going to be doing. We'll need to choose the file format for the file that we've downloaded, which is a vmdk file. And then -O. We need to choose the format that we want to output it to, and again, that's qemu-img. Next, what we're going to do is give it the file name for the vmdk file, and we see it right there, so all I need to do is just add that file name, and then we'll give it a file name for the resulting converted image. I'll just call mine debian-server.qemu-img, just like that. So I'll press Enter. And this process might take some time, and after it finishes, we'll be ready to begin the process of rebuilding the VM within OpenStack. And it looks like the process is complete. So if I list my storage, you'll see the qemu-img file is right there. So at this point, we are ready to import it into OpenStack. In the previous section, I showed you how to convert the disk of an ESXi VM into the qemu-img format, and now we're going to see what the process looks like to import it into OpenStack. And for that, I'll access my OpenMetal Cloud to get into OpenStack. And here we have the login page. So I'll log in. And here we go. And the overall process is pretty easy at this point. What we'll do is expand Compute, which is already expanded in my case, and then we'll click on Images. As you can see, I have a number of images already available for various distributions, but what we want to do is create a new one. So I'll click Create Image right here. And then for the name, you can just name it whatever you'd like. I'm going to keep the name the same as the one that I've downloaded. And then what we're going to do is click Browse. We'll go to the Downloads directory. We'll find the qemu-img file, which is right here, and then I'll click Open. For the format, we'll drop this down right here. We're going to select qemu-img. We need to tell OpenStack which particular image format that it should be expecting. So I'll click on that right there. Now a number of these fields we could leave blank, but what I do want to do is change the minimum disk. I'm going to change it to 32 gigabytes. That was the original size of the image back on ESXi. I just want to make sure that I choose the appropriate minimum to be the same size as the image itself. That way it avoids problems in the future. For minimum RAM, I'm going to leave it at 0 in my case, although you can customize that on your end if you'd like. You could also type a description here if you'd like to do that, but I'm going to keep it simple. So what I'll do is click Create Image. Alright, so the image upload process has finished on my end. In fact, we see it down here, Debian Server. That's the one that we converted from VMware and then imported here into OpenStack. And essentially what we're going to do is build a new virtual machine from that image. And that gives you an idea already of what the workflow is like. You'll export a virtual machine from VMware, convert the disk image, import it into OpenStack, and then build a replacement VM with that image. But before we dive into that, I just want to mention one quick thing. You'll see up here that I'm in the admin project currently, and if I drop this down, I don't have any other projects. So if you want to create a new project, what you'll do is go to Identity here on the left, and then you'll go to Projects. What I'm going to do is create a new project, and I'm going to give it a name. I'll just name it Learn Linux TV, and I'll create the project. Then once we create it, we can scroll down and find the project that we just set up, and it's right here. So we're going to go to Manage Members. We're going to add our username to this particular project. I'm using the admin user right now, so I'll add that. And then I'll drop this down right here and set it to admin. I want to have full access to this particular solution. Anyway, I'll click Save. And now here on the drop-down, you'll see that we have a new project. So basically, this is more or less a namespace where your resources are going to live. And it's a good idea to try to have everything categorized as best you can. It just makes it a lot easier to find things later. So if you want to activate the project that you just created, you'll click on it. And you'll notice that my project has changed to Learn Linux TV. Again, you don't have to do this, but it is a good idea to create different projects for the types of things that you're doing within OpenStack. Anyway, to start the process of building the virtual machine, we'll click on Project. We're going to go to Compute, and then Instances. Next, we'll click Launch Instance. And then next, we'll give it a name. I'm just going to keep the name the same to make everything consistent. I'll just give it a quick description. And I want to create just one instance. We'll click Next. Now Source is where we're going to choose the image that we imported. So if we scroll down, we should find it on the list, and here it is. To select the image, we'll click the up arrow right here, which will move it into the selection at the top. And you'll see right here that Debian Server is selected. The format is QCOW2, which is what we're expecting. So far, so good. We'll scroll down and then click Next. And then continuing, we'll choose the flavor for our instance. My recommendation is to choose one that's close to the original server. For example, if you had 4 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM on the original server in VMware, then you select this one right here. Now the instance may or may not be an exact match, but we want to choose one that's close enough. I'm going to choose a micro instance in my case. Just keep in mind the minimum disk size that we set when we imported the image. We'll want to make sure that we choose an instance type that has at least that amount of storage. I chose 32 gigabytes in my case, and this one has 50, so it's going to be fine for my use case. I'll click the up arrow to choose this flavor right here, and we'll see that it moved into the selection at the top. So far, so good. To continue, we'll click Next. And on this screen, we're going to choose a network to give the VM access to. I only have one set up in my OpenStack implementation, but if you have a specific network that you want it to run in, you could choose that from the list down here if you do have something to choose. But since I don't, I'm just going to leave it on the default selection right here. We'll click Next. And then here on this screen, we can allocate ports to the virtual machine. I'm not actually serving anything on my end, but if I was, I could select a port right here if I had one set up. We're keeping it simple in this tutorial, so I'm going to click Next to move on to the next step. When it comes to security groups, we have default security group selected. It's the only one that I have here. Now I do recommend that you do create security groups and use them, but I'm not going to go over it in this video because during the OpenStack course that I did earlier on in the life of the channel, I've already covered this. So I'll leave a card for the video right here that covers security groups. Essentially what you'll do is create a security group if you don't already have one, or you could just use the default like I am. But in the future, I recommend that even if you use the default, that you do create security groups and segregate your resources accordingly. Again, that's outside the scope of this particular video, so I'm just going to leave it on default, but if you want to learn more, just check out the video that I just mentioned and you'll learn all about that. Anyway, I'll click Next to move on to the next step. Now here what we could do is import a key pair or create a new one for SSH. And I do recommend that you import a key pair if you have one. All you have to do is click this button right here and then find the file and upload it, or you can actually just paste it in right here if you want to paste in the public key. So for example, I could click Browse. In the case of Linux, we can go to our home directory, and by default your SSH folder is going to be hidden. At least in Linux, you can hold Control and press H to show hidden files. Other operating systems have a similar concept. Inside the .ssh folder, we have our public key, and here's mine right here. I'm going to click Open, and that's going to populate the information right here with what's in that public key. I'll just call mine jkey, and for the type, we'll set it to SSH. And again, all of this is optional, especially considering that you may have already had an SSH key associated in the image that you imported. But again, if you want to set up that now, you certainly can do that. I'll click Import Key Pair, and now we have my public key right here ready for use. Anyway, we'll click Next to continue. And the configuration screen is really useful. If you have a bash script or some sort of script that you want to run when the instance is provisioned, you could paste that information in right here, which helps with provisioning virtual machines. That's definitely a great feature. Again, something I covered earlier in the life of the channel, but if this is something that you want to take advantage of, you definitely can. Anyway, I'll click Next. For the rest of the screens here, I'm just going to leave them at their default. I could bypass the other screens by simply clicking Launch Instance, and that's what I'll do right now. And we can see that the instance is being created, so we just need to give it some time to finish. And once it's done, we'll check it out and see if it worked. So as you can see right here, the instance is running. And to check it out, we can click the drop down right here and then go to Console. That'll show us what's on the virtual screen for the VM. And as you can see, it's running. We have the login screen right here. And to test it out, I'll log in. And we're in. Now earlier I created a file just to prove that it is in fact the same instance that was running on VMware. And we see that file right there. So I'm going to show the contents of it. And it says Hello World, exactly as it did on VMware. So this is the same instance. We successfully migrated it from VMware to OpenStack. And there you go. In this video, we worked through the process of migrating a virtual machine from VMware ESXi and then importing that into OpenStack. And as you saw, the process is fairly straightforward. You start off by exporting the virtual machine. Once you do that, you convert the disk image to the QCOW2 format. Once that's done, you import it into OpenStack, and then finally, you build a new virtual machine from that image. And basically, after you do that, it's just a matter of migrating your other virtual machines, and then once all of that's done, well, you're migrated. Anyway, I had a ton of fun producing this content for you guys, as usual. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to click that like button to let YouTube know. That helps the YouTube algorithm understand that we need more Linux on YouTube. I would really appreciate that. And I also appreciate OpenMetal sponsoring today's video. Definitely check them out if you're looking for an OpenStack environment and you want to partner with a company that lives and breathes OpenStack. They're highly recommended. Anyway, thank you guys again for checking out this video, and I'll see you in the next one.